Hey everybody, this is Mr. Mom coming at you again with another APUSH video. This is our third video focusing in on topic 3.10, Shaping a New Republic. Now, previously we had been talking in this lesson about American foreign policy in the 1790s during the Washington and Adams administrations. But this time we're going to be shifting gears and bringing it closer to home. And we're going to be taking a look at domestic policy. And when we do talk about the impact of George Washington as our first president, and of course, part of it is just going to be, reality because whoever the first president was, Washington is going to be setting a standard for future presidents. So I know this is going to sound weird, but he's going to be creating a precedent for future presidents. And one of those examples of how Washington is going to be kind of molding what the executive branch is going to be like or look like in his own image is going to be the creation of what's going to be called the cabinet. Now, the cabinet is a group of, at least in its initial form, was created to be the chief advisors to the President of the United States. But these are not informal advisors. These were people that were responsible for a specific portion of the bureaucracy. And in the initial cabinet created by Washington, there'll be three departments. There'll be the Treasury Department, State Department, War Department, and then the additional position, though not a department yet, the position of Attorney General. Today, the Attorney General is the head of the Justice Department. Now, once again, Washington becoming the first president was chosen in part because he was seen as being above politics. He was seen as somebody that could bring in the best people with the best ideas, regardless of ideology, to try to, put America in its best, position possible at this very critical juncture. And you'll see that in his first two picks for cabinet positions. For Treasury, he's going to bring in Alexander Hamilton, his aide-de-camp during the war. Hamilton was viewed as a financial wizard, a genius, a prodigy, in fact, going back to his days as a teenager working at a plantation in Nevis. And then at the State Department, bringing in Hamilton's arch-rival politically, Thomas Jefferson. Hamilton's going to be more on the what we would call kind of the conservative side, Jefferson more on the liberal side, so to speak. Of course, what liberal and conservative meant back then is not exactly what it translates to today, but understand that those two guys were on different ends of the spectrum on a lot of things. He also brings in Henry Knox as the war secretary. Knox, you may remember, was the guy that helped bring the cannon from Fort Ticonderoga outside of Boston to help American Continental forces in 1776, and then he's going to bring in a guy named Edmund Randolph to be the Attorney General. So, the thing about Washington is, and Washington would be probably the first one to tell you, is that he is not an idea guy. He is not the big brain in the room. And he's not above, deferring to his advisors to kind of, let them come up with the big ideas and him just be the final person to give either a thumbs up or a thumbs down to the policy. So you can see in so much of Washington's leadership style, he puts the nation's needs first, not his own needs, not his ego, not his pocketbook even. It's putting the needs of the country first. Now, when we take a look at some of the early legislation that the first Congress is going to be creating, that will include the Judiciary Act of 1789. Now, what this law does is take what is a constitutional responsibility, or a constitutional power, if you will, and then exercising it. So if you look into the Constitution, it stipulates that aside from the Supreme Court being created, which has to exist per Article 3 of the Constitution, Congress has the authority to create all what they call inferior courts, federal courts that are below the Supreme Court. And it's not going to take very long for the U.S. Congress to begin to do that. So what the Judiciary Act basically does is start to create a framework besides the Supreme Court for what the federal judiciary is going to be. District courts, then courts of appeal, ultimately leading up to the Supreme Court. But really the man for today, if we're going to say who's the star of the show, who's our protagonist in this video for today, well, there's no question, it's this guy right here. This is Alexander Hamilton. Many of you, of course, may know his story from the acclaimed musical, but understand that Alexander Hamilton, before he became a Broadway name, is going to be known in Wall Street. He's going to be known in Federalist circles, and of course Washington's cabinet as the chief brain for what is going to be America's initial financial policies. So let's get into what this is going to be looking like. So when we talk about Hamilton's plan for the federal government, a lot of it is going to be situated on how do you put America in the best position possible financially. We don't want to be burdened with lots of debt. We don't want to be beholden to other countries or other financial institutions. So that's going to be a priority. Also, how can we tailor these financial policies in such a way as to help promote unity across the states? Hamilton is a big, what you would call, nationalist kind of a guy. You know, if we're talking about, does he view our country as the United States or does he view it as America? It's more the latter. You know, he views that, you know, we are all tied together as, you know, as much of a singular unit as states as we can. And he's going to use his financial policies to try to promote some of that. So anyhow, the first part of Hamilton's financial plan is to announce that the federal government is going to be paying off all of their debts at face value. So in other words, it is saying to foreign countries, it's saying to, those that fought in the Continental Army, whoever, that you will be paid by the federal government. This new American federal government under the Constitution will pay off its debts. And in a move to bring the states together, Hamilton also has, as part of the plan, a provision for the federal government to take on all of the state debts. So if you are, a state like Massachusetts or New York or whoever, the federal government's going to be bailing you out. The federal government's going to be taking on those debts for you. Now you might be thinking, well, why would the federal government add to its debt? That gives it more, financial burden, more of a financial burden, if you will. But once again, think about what this means if you are a state. If you are a state like Massachusetts that, maybe you're a little nervous about this thing called the United States of America. Maybe this federal government is not what you want. Well, now think about what this federal government's doing for you. It's going to be paying off your debts as a state. So now as a state, your future is now financially linked to the well-being and the future of the federal government. And that's by design by Hamilton. Pretty shrewd move. Now, understand that, in order to pay off these debts, the federal government's going to have to bring in revenue. And note, there was no federal income tax back then like there is today. We're going to be seeing the federal government, starting with Hamilton's policies, start off what's going to be a century plus of the main way to raise revenue for the country, and that's going to be through the use of tariffs. We're going to be seeing high tariffs being placed on foreign goods. And note that it's not so much designed to be protectionist in nature. In other words, it's not so much designed to help American businesses be more competitive with their foreign counterparts. At this point in time, it's really more about just bringing that money in, raising that revenue to help pay off those debts. Now, in addition to the goals of paying off the debt, we're also going to see Hamilton be really creative in trying to create an institution that will promote more financial stability for the United States. And that is going to be the Bank of the United States. And I commonly refer to that as the bus. So if I say bus, that's what we're referring to. So the bus is going to be modeled off of what England already had. They already had the Bank of England over there. And Hamilton, being an Anglophile in many respects, wanted to copy that. And so the idea being is that the bus would be technically a private bank, but would be responsible for all of the federal government's money. And with that funding, with that money in this bank, that bank then can issue currency that is going to have, in essence, the full faith and credit of the federal government. So, and that's going to be significant because going back to the days of Articles of Confederation, every state had their own currency. It was an economic nightmare. So the idea being is, if, according to Hamilton, if we can create this bus, we can have a financial institution that will promote stable currency and a stable overall economy. It'll make us look more responsible on the global stage, which will help us to borrow money if we need to, all that kind of great stuff. So for Hamilton, this is a no-brainer. This is something that has to be done in order to get America on the right footing financially out the gates. And note, he is going to have a lot of supporters in America for this bus plan. Those supporters are going to be mostly found in northern states. Northern states are going to be, mostly dominated by federalists like Hamilton. And a lot of why these folks are going to be supporting the bus is that it's going to allow more of these merchants in the New England area that are basing their financial stability on the ability to trade internationally, that this is going to be helping to promote that. However, if you go into the southern states, which is more Jeffersonian territory, these were folks that did not like the bus. They didn't like the plan at all. They were afraid that, well, first off, they were mad that if the federal government is now paying off all the state debts, what if you're already a state that paid off its debts, like Virginia? You don't see as much of a benefit for that. Furthermore, when you are talking about raising tariffs, yes, that can help your New England merchants up there be more competitive, if you will. But understand that anytime that you apply a tariff to a foreign good, that means that prices overall are going to be rising. And if you are one of these Southerners that's not a merchant per se, trading across the Atlantic, you're just a customer, well, then that means higher prices for you. So bottom line, the northern part of the United States that was more friendly to Hamilton, they see the debt assumption, they see the tariffs, they see the bus as all good things to help them out, and particularly from a financial perspective. But in the southern part of the United States, they don't like the assumption of state debt. Many of those states had already paid off their debt. They didn't like the tariffs because that's going to mean higher prices for them. And when it came to the bus in particular, there was real concern about what this Bank of the U.S. is going to mean. First off, in the South, you got mostly farmers. Farmers are not a huge fan of banks anyway, because it's the banks that are kind of, making farmers beholden to them, because the banks are the ones that loan them money to start their farms and can, demand payoffs for their loans at a moment's notice and can threaten the livelihood of farmers. So farmers and banks always have a very contentious relationship. But beyond that, there is just this sense of, if you allow the federal government to create a bus, what does this mean about federal power moving forward? And this really does become, a matter of contention, because if you look in the Constitution, there's no mention of Congress having the ability to create a bank at all, period. It's not mentioned. And Hamilton's okay with that because he is pointing to a different part of the Constitution that says that Congress has the ability to create all powers that are necessary and proper to carry out the foregoing powers. In other words, not only can Congress do the things that's enumerated, like literally listed in black and white in the Constitution, but it can also do the things that are needed to carry out the things that are enumerated. And some of the things that are enumerated include the ability to borrow money, the ability to coin currency, etc., etc. Well, for example, if you have the power to coin currency, couldn't a bank be used to coin currency? Hamilton certainly believes so. And, when we talk about using this necessary and proper clause portion of the Constitution, Hamilton's going to be proving himself to be what we call a loose constructionist, believing in broad interpretation of the Constitution's power, thereby giving the federal government broader power overall. Jefferson, his chief rival, is going to be arguing against the bus and arguing against using the necessary and proper clause in this case because he believes that you need to have a strict interpretation of the Constitution. A very narrow view of what the federal government can actually do through the Constitution. And basically, as far as Jefferson's concerned, that unless it is enumerated, like for example, unless it says in the Constitution that the federal government can create a bank, then the federal government shouldn't be doing that. That, in other words, if there's going to be government banks, it should be at the state level, not at the federal level. Jefferson's very, very paranoid about an overexertion of federal authority, whereas Hamilton's certainly embracing it. But this is going to be pretty contentious, and it's going to get really nasty. But once again, Washington steps in and works out a deal. Once again, he's putting the needs of the country first and not trying to tip the scales one way or the other. Bottom line, Washington brings Hamilton and Jefferson together to hammer out a deal in terms of whether or not Hamilton's overall policy should be implemented, the assumption plan, etc. Bottom line, Jefferson is going to eventually sign off on supporting Hamilton's plan in exchange for something that Jefferson probably wanted more than killing the Bank of the United States, for example. Placing the new capital city in the South. The Constitution mandates that a new capital city will be created, but it doesn't say where. Jefferson believes that if you build it in the South, that will give the South more influence. So in exchange for building D.C. in the South, we're going to be seeing Hamilton's plan put into effect. All right, we're going to leave it right there. We're going to come back to more domestic policies in the 1790s next time. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.